Welcome to Geek Philosophy, where we love geeky wisdom. If you're new to the channel, my name is Brian, and I want to welcome you to this entry in our new Learning to Play D&D series. In our last video, we described the game as a whole, and then we discussed the role of the player and the Dungeon Master in the game, the three pillars of D&D gameplay, and we also talked about the basic D20 roll as the core mechanic of 5th edition D&D. Now, in this video, we're going to push forward with learning a little bit more about your character's ability scores and proficiencies. But we'll also talk a little bit more about those cool dice you'll be using and provide some examples of how this all fits together when you play the game. Before we dive in, though, let's review those three pillars of D&D. Exploration involves traveling through the world and uncovering secrets and interacting with the environment. Social encounters involves interactions with other characters in the game world, such as the non-player characters or monsters, but it also involves interaction with your other players at the table. Combat involves fighting enemies, either in self-defense because they're attacking you, or on a quest that you're going after because you have to vanquish a foe. Now, these pillars are just the framework of gameplay, and it kind of gives you an idea of what are the basic themes that you're going to be encountering during the game itself. But how do you know which stuff your character is good at? Well, a big part of that is your character's ability scores. Every character has a set of 6 scores in D&D: Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. Now, these ability scores are determined when you create your character. At my table, and at a lot of tables since the beginning of the game, you roll some dice to figure out what those scores are going to be. But there are other methods. They've got point-buy systems and a standard array of scores that you can assign. Just ask your Dungeon Master which method they would like you to use for their game. These abilities will help determine how capable your character is at pretty much everything they try to do. This goes for the physical stuff like attacking with a sword, or climbing up the side of a mountain, or even sneaking around. But it also goes for things like noticing a trap, or remembering that obscure piece of lore, or persuading the shopkeeper to give you a better deal on something. Higher ability scores give you higher bonuses to your rolls, and unfortunately, lower ability scores may actually give you a penalty to your roll, but hopefully you don't run into that too often. So for example, a character with a strength score of 18 has a modifier of +4. But depending on other key features of your character, like your character's race or species, your class, your background, all kinds of other things, you may be proficient in certain things. What does that mean in D&D? It means that you have certain skills or weapons or tools or abilities that you have a proficiency bonus with. For all characters at level 1, you get a +2 proficiency bonus, and as you level up, as your character levels up, you get a higher proficiency bonus with the levels. So when your character attempts anything that they're proficient in, they get to add both the ability score and the proficiency bonus to the roll. Let's say you're playing a first level character that has a charisma bonus of +3, but you're also proficient with persuasion. So that +2 proficiency bonus will work with persuasion rolls. So in a social encounter in the game, if your character is trying to persuade a shopkeeper to give you a good deal on an item, the DM might ask you to make a persuasion check. Any player trying to roll this could roll a d20 and add their charisma modifier, because persuasion is based on charisma anyway. So in this case, because you have charisma bonus of +3, you're definitely adding that to the roll. But because you're also proficient in persuasion, you get to add that extra proficiency bonus to +2. This means you would add +5 to the roll. That's huge. If you get to roll the dice and add 5 to it, that gets you better than what you would have had without it. See how this works? It's a bonus. It's this combination of ability bonuses and proficiency bonuses that have a big impact on your character's chances of succeeding on those d20 rolls. But I want to warn you, even if you have a low ability score modifier and you're not proficient in something, you can still try to do stuff. That's the great thing about a role-playing game. You can try to do anything. You're just more likely to succeed and have a higher roll if you have those higher bonuses. So even characters who aren't proficient in a skill or have a low ability score can still succeed sometimes with a high enough roll. So if you need an 18 to climb up a sheer rock face, but you don't have a strength bonus, maybe it's a 10 and you have a +0, but you roll a 19, guess what? You still made it. You did it anyway. Huzzah! Now, we've already talked about the D20. You know about it from the first video, and we just talked about it again, but let's dive a little bit deeper into the other dice that you'll be using in the game. D&D uses dice with varying numbers of size. You already learned about D20. The D refers to D as dice or die, and the number represents the number of sides on the dice. For example, the common standard cube that you have in most board games is called a D6 because it has 6 sides. But you'll also use things like the D12, the D10, the D8, and the D4, usually for the damage for weapons and spells. Like I mentioned before, you're likely going to be rolling a D20 for most of the things you try to do, and then adding or subtracting some things, hopefully adding most of the time, then you'll get your result. But how do you know if you're adding and subtracting all the right stuff? And how does that work in the game? How do you actually play? Well, your Dungeon Master will tell you as you're starting out, but let's cover a few of the basics. Most of the time, it's as simple as just talking things out at the table. You listen to what the DM and the other players are saying, and you describe what your character is going to try to do in any given circumstance. So then the DM will ask you to make certain types of D20 rolls, so you'll add the appropriate modifiers and come up with a result. But also you'll have a character sheet, which has the information already written there. You just have to know where to look. We're going to cover that in our next video. But for now, just know that these things are going to be there for you. You do the work ahead of time to kind of write everything out, have it ready for you at a glance. Now, the DM has a specific target number in mind for you to reach. They may announce it, or they may keep it secret to add a little bit of excitement to the game. This often represents things like the difficulty of certain tasks, or what you'll need to actually hit the enemy, whatever the case. If your total of the roll that you made and the bonuses that you add meets or exceeds the target number, you succeed. If it doesn't, you fail. Now, let me give you a few examples of how the D20 roll and ability modifiers and proficiency bonuses all work in gameplay. Maybe you want to jump from roof to roof, and it's a pretty good distance, and the DM wants you to make a strength or athletics check. You'll be asked to roll a d20 and add your character's strength modifier to determine your result. But if you're also proficient in athletics, you'll get to add the proficiency bonus to that roll too. Or maybe you hear the Dungeon Master say those 3 famous words: roll for initiative. That's the DM letting you know that combat is starting. An initiative roll is used to determine the order of action in the combat. As usual, you'll roll a d20, you'll add your character's initiative modifier, and determine your place in the turn order. Then when it's your turn in combat, you might want to attack with a longsword, for example. After rolling that d20 for your attack roll this time, you'll add your character's attack bonus for that weapon to see if you hit or miss. And that attack uses both strength for some weapons and dexterity for others. And if you're proficient with the weapon, you guessed it, you'll add that bonus too. You'll usually figure all this stuff out when you fill out your character sheet, so you don't have to do too much on the fly in the moment. Now, when you hit, you'll get to roll some of those other dice to see how much damage you do. Or maybe you're exploring and you find a treasure chest, and you want to pick the lock, but unfortunately, you set off a trap. The DM may call for a d20 saving throw to resist the effects of the trap. You'll roll that d20 and add your character's appropriate saving throw bonus to determine whether you succeed or fail in resisting the effect. If it's poison gas, for example, they may ask for a constitution saving throw. If it's an arrow flying across the room, the DM may ask for a dexterity saving throw. You're starting to see how those ability scores pop up everywhere? Okay, since we're talking about this d20 roll thing all the time, here's an interesting mechanic that was introduced in 5th edition that's become really important to the game. Sometimes you may have advantage or disadvantage on a d20 roll. Now, this doesn't have to do with the numbers that you add to the roll, so don't worry, there's not any more adding and subtracting that needs to happen here. But when you have advantage, you get to roll the d20 twice and then use the higher roll. And this may be situational, or there may be an ability that gives you advantage on certain things. Now, on the other hand, disadvantage is you roll that d20 twice and take the lower result. Your character might be restrained or blinded or put in some other bad situation. So you can see how advantage and disadvantage has a significant impact on your chances of success in most situations. Okay, I covered a lot of new information here, but hopefully not too overwhelming. Just remember, D&D is a game where you kind of work together with everyone and you create that fun and exciting story, but it's also a game where the players will help you out as well as the Dungeon Master. So don't be afraid to try new things, make mistakes, and most importantly, just have fun. I hope you found today's video useful, and if you have any other suggestions for new players, please leave them in the comments below. In our next video entry in the series, like I mentioned, we're going to take a closer look at the 5e character sheet and how you can make use of it to do a lot of the stuff we talked about today. You know, all the talk about games and dice and everything else has kind of made me think of my favorite Stephen Wright joke. I think it's wrong that only one company makes the game Monopoly. Cheers.